looks like a Western. But in Westerns, the bad guy never wins. In this duel, I carry no gun and no good guy costume. Just the poetry of who I am. The diversity of colors is covered with a sepia tone, and a big mustache hides our smiles. A character that is lost in the past and lost in history. You have guessed the riddle.
Down in Mexico, I like to consume.
What do you like to consume?
I like to consume.
Oh, baby.
I like to wash it down with tequila, tequila arriba. Down in Mexico, I like to eat salsa tacos, guacamole, salsa tacos, guacamole.
Down in Mexico, let's be happy. We've had a good day. Let's sing. Vamos, Adelita.
We don't really have a sense of what it means to be global. To be global means you can take from different perspectives and understand, you can deal with them, and you can adjust and adapt. And I think that in the United States we'll still have that concept of people adapt to us rather than we to them.
Thank you! That's what you do, right? That's what you do!
I think that some of the main ones include kind of caricatures of like a 19th century Mexico that is very rural and is still sort of tied to the land, is still sort of suffused with people who wear sombreros and bandoleros. I think people still sort of think that way in the States, but it's still, in spite of the fact that it's right there and that it is an immediate neighbor, I think people still have an image of it that's, 150 years old and based on sort of more rural stereotypes.
Normalmente cuando vienen a hacer una película lo hacen en lugares que son rurales y que México no es solo un país rural.
Americans who travel probably have a slightly different impression, and yet I think that still predominates that kind of old world image, even when they see things, say in the news to the contrary. I think it still sort of sticks with people.
An echo travels and announces that Mexico offers roads of adventure and free pieces of sand. In search of that Mexico that looks just like in the movies, many are hypnotized by the beauty of the desert and the sea. But just when they feel the unfamiliar spice in their tongue, they stay close to the north.
Are you an American? Senor, do you like Mexico?
No, not very much.
Most Americans, for instance, I don't think would think that there's a city anywhere in Mexico. And their impression is that everyone sort of wanders around, and it's quite strange.
Y esa es una imagen, pues que no va, porque para empezar no es así. México es un país grande, es un país que tiene ciudades, es un país que está creciendo, es un país que es mucho más que esa imagen que existe, machista, o esa imagen que se tiene del mexicano como sumiso, del mexicano. Es mucho más.
Como vivir en cualquier otra, mismos problemas, mismo tráfico, el mismo estrés porque tengo que llegar a mi trabajo, el mismo estrés porque tengo que hacer bien mi trabajo, la misma competencia que hay en todas las ciudades de que si no hago bien mi trabajo alguien más lo va a hacer. Se me hace como cualquier otra ciudad.
The urban clock suffers insomnia, while walking crowds and traffic jams wake up with the smell of homemade tortillas. But the best part is dessert, a sweet taste of the past that rebels against modernity.
And then, of course, the whole issue of immigration, undocumented workers coming across. Most people don't see that as undocumented workers. They see them as illegal people, so breaking the law, so to speak. So I think that's a general perception of people, especially in Texans who live along the border, of what Mexico is. So not a positive one.
I think it becomes difficult for most people to dissociate their opinions and attitudes towards immigration from their opinions and attitudes towards, people who sort of stay in Mexico and aren't immigrants or aren't trying to find work in the States. But it's quite difficult, I think, for most people not to separate the two. I think that they kind of feed off of one another.
Que el mexicano es flojo.
I think that's a really strong stereotype that may sort of supersede all of the other ones. And the ironic thing is that as a stereotype, it should be the one that is actually destroyed before all of the others, mostly because the sorts of work that many Mexicans wind up doing in the States are manual labor. The sorts of things where, you don't actually sort of do it if you're lazy. And it's quite strange that stereotype seems to really sort of hold on, even as the experience that people have of immigration should work against that and should sort of destroy it.
Near the border, Mexico is an immigrant with no name. An immigrant who holds a family picture in the pockets of his work uniform. Nobody seems to know his story, and his face is hardly shown in the screens. And even though Hollywood may not see it, I see contrast, feeling, and taste behind that wall. I'm glad I'm back.
Vuelvo a la frontera, otra vez he de atravesar. Es el viento que me manda.
La imagen del mexicano gordito con su sombrero, moreno.
Probably always a dark, swarthy-looking person. They don't realize the diversity of phenotype that exists in Mexico.
El México es un México pluricultural construido por una diversidad increíble de pueblos, en donde incluso el mismo mestizo juega varios roles en determinados lugares. Entonces, de entrada yo no podría hablar de un proceso de homogeneidad como tal, es más bien un proceso de diversidad.
I don't think that people know much about the history of Mexico, for example, nor do they know the history of the United States and Mexico. If they knew, that part of the United States had been Mexico, and that the Spanish Trail went all the way through, Texas, all the Southwest up to California. If they knew those kinds of things, if they knew about the advances that the indigenous groups in Mexico have.
Education might play a role in it. I know it sounds horrible from somebody who teaches, but I'm not quite sure that that's always going to work. There's some people for whom telling them these things is never going to make a difference, and what will make a difference is them living in communities where they share experiences, where they share disaster, where they share triumph.
Probably the biggest insult of all, and that is that we're not even seen as important. We're not an issue. And in the United States, race relations have to do with black and white issues. They haven't looked at the fact that there is an ethnic minority that is now larger than the African American.
Pues resulta que hay muchísimo latino en Estados Unidos y eso se presta a que se generen estereotipos porque la gente de allá necesita clasificar rápidamente, ¿no?
Most Americans who haven't traveled or who don't think about these things regularly are probably still at the stage of trying to break down and make distinctions between Hispanic and Latin, still trying to figure out what the difference is between all of these various groups which they kind of lump together as being of Spanish-speaking stock.
I think one of the reasons why is that among Latinos, it's a very diverse group. Puerto Ricanos are different from Cubanos and different from Mexicanos. So there's not a clear-cut idea that people in Hollywood have about who Latinos are.
I live in this country now, I'm called by this name. I speak this language, it's not quite the same. For no other reason than this, it's my home. And the places I used to be, far from are gone.
México es un país que cuando lo conoce un extranjero que viene realmente a conocerlo, el fondo de sus raíces, se enamora de México y esa persona extranjera va y platica cosas maravillosas de nosotros los mexicanos y de nuestro país, que no somos nomás un grupo. Es un país muy grande que tiene diversidad de cosas y de costumbres.
Mi madre, que vino a visitar, se fue maravillada de México, le encantó la gente, le encantaron los colores, que somos de muchos colores aquí, dice, es algo en lo que yo no me había fijado, Se ven las casas de colores y a ella le llama mucho la atención, ¿no?
And students certainly are quite willing to travel there for their senior year of high school or their university trips there, and yet when they travel there, the means by which they travel sort of turns the whole place into a playground. It's not really like they're traveling there to kind of learn a whole lot about culture and politics. They're really just kind of traveling there to go on vacation. That probably still perpetuates other types of stereotypes.
And so my thoughts are that every time I go to Mexico, it's like having a revitalization of my soul. It's an infusion to my identity, to my character, and to who I am.
Y que sabemos sobrellevar los tiempos difíciles y también sabemos vivir los tiempos que nos llegan bonitos, las tradiciones familiares. Entonces es muy difícil opinar así sin tener bases. Es muy delicado opinar así de un país.
In my Mexico, music has power. Music dances in our blood with passion, and our spicy food is spicy as our music.
It's a very central question. And if you can't answer that question of who am I, which means what makes you up, then you don't have a strong sense of identity.
Yo creo que hay muchos tipos de percepción en cuanto a la identidad del mexicano. Yo creo que todavía no hay una real mezcla de mestizaje o de sentirte mexicano como un mestizo, ¿no? De indígenas y de otra raza.
So everyone that lives in Mexico is a Mexican, and you accept all those people as Mexicans. I mean, you don't look at anybody and say, I wonder where they're from. You know that they're Mexicans by how you perceive them. Maybe you have that question with indigenous groups, but yeah, you do know that they're Mexican. But in the United States, it's a country of immigrants. And so it's hard because we have the stereotype of what an American is.
Los beneficios, los entornos en los cuales se desenvuelve el mexicano no son los mismos, económicamente hablando, no son los mismos. O sea, la riqueza del país está concentrada en unas cuantas personas, cuando un grueso de personas no logra ni percibir $2 al día, ¿no? Es como si hablar posiblemente de Méxicos diferentes, ¿no?
Yo creo que por un lado hay ese sentimiento de así nuestros indígenas y los mayas, los aztecas crearon estas pirámides, como ese sentimiento de algo que fue muy grande pero ya no es. Sin embargo, los indígenas que están ahorita me parece que un gran menosprecio.
Diversity is grown by the seeds of the past. The past tells me a bedtime story of how my blood was made of mestizo colors. A bedtime story that has no ending and is filled with characters who speak different languages we don't understand.
I mean, what gives you power is economic power. So if you don't have, I mean, we're poor, Latinos are poor. So if you don't have economic power, you're not going to control, social things or commercial things or political things or any of those things.
It was once said that by a cultural historian that America was the graveyard of cultures, that culture sort of went there to die as they were sort of transformed into something new and something different and something that broke down their old bonds, social bonds.
También es un país que está junto a otro país muy grande que es Estados Unidos, entonces todo lo que de allá viene se mama sin masticarlo, ¿no? Solo se mama y ya.
Sí, hemos estado perdiendo mucha identidad porque vivimos muy cerca de los Estados Unidos. Entonces necesitamos urgentemente, desde el seno de nuestros hogares, enseñar a nuestros hijos a amar sus tradiciones, su cultura, que es un tesoro que tenemos como nación, los mexicanos.
Cultural historians tend now to sort of argue that people are able to defend their culture and stake off a territory that they can sort of keep relatively authentic and untainted from American cultural imperialism. But I think that economics goes a long way towards breaking down lots of other cultures and creating what is essentially a new synthetic culture that weaves all of these things together in a new and different way, but not necessarily in a way that reflects how people live in the real world.
Mexico believes and prays on its knees. The old ones pray for respect from modernity. They pray for the young ones to believe in their stories. They pray to the hills and the forests. I pray for my prayers to have time to exist in the cities. I pray for my family, for identity. Many stories are sold to the world as a bargain. Stories that have power to travel and stay in our memories. But the ingredients of culture may never match with those on the screens. Screens have no sense to understand the complexity of faces and language.
El hecho de decir, pues, pertenezco a esto, ¿no? O sea, de pronto hay una gran familia, o no sé, hay algo grande que cobija.
Familia, mi tierra, mi país.
Sobre todo, lo más importante para el mexicano siempre ha sido la familia.
No, mexicano.
I am a Mexican American. I will also call myself a Latina to identify with the larger group of the Americas, and I will also call myself a Chicana because that is a very political, cultural term.
Can you recognize any kind of positive stereotype of Mexicans?
Why don't you ask me how long I've been waiting? Sat down on the road with the gunshots exploding. I'm waiting for you in the gloom and the blazing. I'm waiting for you. I sing like a slave, I know I should know better. I've learned all my lessons right down to the letter. And still I go on like this, year after year, waiting for miracles and shaking with fear. Why don't you answer? Why don't you come save me? Show me how to use all these things that you gave me. Turn me inside out so my bones can save me. Turn me inside out. You've come this close, you can come even closer. The gunshots get louder.